Welcome to Connect 2023. We're so happy that you're here. Want to let you know there are free refreshments. We have water, we have chips, every type of chips you would want down in the exhibit area. And I believe Heritage Christian University is supplying free coffee. That's all the way down in the activity center. So we're going to try to supply you and keep you going here. I'm going to turn this over to Joe Wells. Joe Wells was in some of these talks when we started talking about this years ago. And I couldn't think of anybody better than Joe, because he's got a booming voice and he grabs your attention, and I like his high energy. I give you Brother Joe Wells.
I'm going to use this one right here. Good morning. What a blessing to be together today, and I appreciate you showing up at this hour. I would say an ungodly hour. However, I guess it's really not. God created this hour too. But it is good to be with you. They have given me 15 minutes. You know, if a gospel preacher has 15 minutes, he's in trouble. So we're not going to have a lot of small talk. So I want to bring you to a point in time in 1854. 1854, there was a war that was taking place between Russia and then also a side that contained Britain and Turkey and France. This war was known as the Crimean War, and there was an encounter that was had on a certain front where Russia was actually in what was called the North Valley. And in the North Valley, it was, as it sounds, a low point that had high ridges. And Russia had the high point. As a matter of fact, their artillery was up on the ridge and was at the end of the North Valley. The British were on this particular front this day, and they had received a command, at least a command that they thought was a command, but actually it was a misconstrued command, as the overseeing general, the overseeing authority of the British, gave a command to charge and to attack Russia. You see, at that time period, their warfare was a little different than ours, although strategically it sounds like it might have been similar, in that there were heavy artillery groups, and then there were light artillery groups, or light and very quick advancing and attacking components of a force. This particular force of Britain had a heavy brigade, and then they also had a light brigade. Am I that quiet? There you go. They had a light brigade. Well, the command that came was an instruction to the head of the light brigade to attack Russia at the most heavily fortified position. Now, that's not what the commanding officer wanted, but that's what was relayed. You and I have since, from this historically true occasion, become aware of this, but not necessarily because of military history, but because of poetry. You see, there's an individual by the name of Alfred Lord Tennyson who would write just a few months after this particular charge in December of 1854 a poem that today is still in our books, known as the Charge of the Light Brigade. I'd like to read this poem for you today just to consider, because at the outcome of the poem there's a challenge for all of us as we briefly get this morning motivation shot in the arm of how to approach the will of God, how to approach the commands of God, how to approach the Great Commission that our loving Heavenly Father has put before us. Alfred Lord Tennyson, in recording this event, and with the desire for it never to fade from the mind of mankind, he would say this: half a league, half a league, half a league onward. All in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the light brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the light brigade. Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell. Boldly they rode and well. Into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell rode the 600. flashed all their sabers bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabering the gunners there, charging an army while all the world wondered. Plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke. Cossack and Russian reeled from the saber stroke, shattered and sundered, then they rode back. But not all, not the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon behind them volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell, why horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell, all that was left of them, left of the 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, all the world wondered. Honor the charge they made, honor the light brigade, the noble 600. You see, I told you in that time period they had a heavy brigade and a light brigade, and what really separated the two was the horses that were larger were pulling the heavy artillery, the cannons. The light brigade were individuals who rode with sabers. Some of them might have had pistols or some type of light ammunition, but ultimately these were smaller horses meant to move more quickly and soldiers that were very well trained to strike the enemy with a sword as they rode past them. The problem was when the 600 went into the valley, the Russians started raining down artillery from above, but the 600 kept running to the heaviest fortified, heaviest artillery-equipped group of the Russians. When the Russians saw that there was no reinforcements coming, they came off of the ridge and they surrounded the light brigade of the British. When the British, who were actually in this, of the light brigade, saw that there was no one coming to their rescue, they not only rode to the heaviest fortified component, taking on casualty after casualty, they also then had to fight their way back. And what's interesting about the account of the Light Brigade is you reflect on 600 who went in, but there were 110 killed, 130 wounded, another 30 were injured or captive. The significant loss of men, around 375 horses were killed. All of this took place within a period of 20 minutes. And you and I look at this and we listen to the words of Alfred Lord Tennyson as he would display the mindset of the soldiers of the Light Brigade. And this is what he said, and this is what I want you to think about this morning. He said this: "Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die." You know, I've thought about that a lot as it pertains to our discipleship with Jesus Christ. Sometimes we struggle with the reasoning. I don't know how else to say that. God, if you really loved me, you wouldn't allow me to go through this difficult time. And Lord, if you're really that good, you could stop all the evil and you could deal with all these people who are causing us hardships. We look at this and we say, well, I'm not the one who's the eloquent speaker. I'm not the one who has the ability to stand before people, much echoing the excuses of Moses. Or we, like Naaman, will say this: wait a second, the rivers over here are just fine. Why is it that you're telling me to do something? And oh, by the way, why didn't you come tell me yourself? Why is it that I kind of had to figure this out in a roundabout way? And you and I look at this and sometimes we may struggle. Oh, I know we don't admit that, and I recognize that we're at a conference to grow in evangelism, and we're at a conference because we are choosing to be here on a Wednesday, and I understand all of that. But I also understand my own thought process. And I understand my own struggles. And I understand my own insecurities. And what I'm offering to you today is perhaps if my insecurities and struggles aren't yours, that you have your own that sometimes get in the way of the charge of the commander. You see, what I would offer you this morning is this: that when the Light Brigade received that command to go, even though it was an inaccurate command, even though it was a blunder, as Alfred Lord Tennyson would say, I find it interesting that there is nothing recorded in history where any of those who were in the Light Brigade stopped and said, well, maybe he hasn't thought this one through. Maybe he really doesn't know what he's talking about. Maybe, there's a better way to do this. That's why I think it's interesting that Alfred Lord Tennyson would record the words that would echo the heart and the mind Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. My brothers and sisters, do you recognize today that there are going to be times in your life that God may will for you to go through difficulties. God may will for you to suffer. God may will for things not to turn out the way you think they should turn out. But here's something that I want you to understand. You're not about you anyway. You are a soldier in the army of God to do the bidding of the commanding officer. And so when that command comes, when that charge to go into all the world comes, when that charge to make sure your behavior is excellent, even amongst people who are causing your pain and causing your suffering, which is exactly what Peter would say in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12, keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the thing in which they slander you as evildoers, they may, because of your good deeds as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. When the commanding officer says, make sure that you don't just say the right words, but you live the right life, even if it means you suffer. Even if it means that you don't get what you think you should get in this life. He said, remind yourself of this. Remind yourself that the God who sent His Son to die on the cross for you has not abandoned you, even in a charge that is difficult to swallow. Even in an obstacle that appears to be before you that is impossible. You see, I would propose this to you. God can be glorified not just in your good times. God can be glorified in your difficult times. That's what 1 Peter's about. That's what 1 Peter's all about. When you think about how many times the word suffering occurs, over 17 times in the book of 1 Peter. It's the third most used word behind God and Christ. I want you to think about how significant that is in the book of 1 Peter. And in all of that, he tells them, you know what? You were saved with the imperishable and enduring seed. You were saved by the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. You were saved by the blood of Jesus. And in all of that, he says, don't ever forget. Don't ever forget the great price that was paid. But because of that, that changes how you live. Brothers and sisters, when I say that you're not about you anymore, I really mean that the Bible teaches that when we obey the gospel, we die to self. And if we ever start living to self again, then we would be even opposite of the light brigade. Because there would have been everything in me on that day to question whether or not the commanding officer knew what he was talking about. But you see, that's what it means to be enrolled in the Army, to be enlisted in the Army. I think it's interesting, while I've never served in military duty, I think it's quite interesting that they will ingrain within our soldiers this concept of you don't question a command. And it's the same reason as we raise our children to obey us, is because even when our children don't understand the why, we need them to respond to what we say. Can you imagine a child who wants to go play ball outside, but the ball rolls into the street? And the parents, they have equipped that child through training to say, hey, when mom says don't go into the street, you don't go into the street, because maybe the child can't see that while the ball is there and that's what they want, there's a car that's coming that will kill them. You've got to trust the one who can see more than you can see. That is the mentality that I think is brought out in 1 Peter. However, I also want you to understand this. It's not an empty mentality. It's one that is rooted in a fact. And that fact is this: the same God who at times, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 17, may will for me to suffer for doing what is good. He's the same God, 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 7, who cares for me. You see, sometimes we struggle because we get distracted with our own humanity. Sometimes we struggle because we start to reason why we know better than God. And then sometimes we struggle because we really question whether or not God cares for us. My brothers and sisters, this morning, I want you to understand something. He endured more than He's ever called you to endure. He he's gone through things that he would never. You think about this from the very beginning. A God who lovingly created all things wanted deeply a relationship with humanity, only to have humanity turn its back on him, not because he did anything wrong to them, but because they just refused to obey. You think about a loving God who would allow for time and time again people to come back to him, like a spouse who had gone away in an adulterous relationship. He would go and pursue them, wanting them to come back. And he would receive them back over and over again. You think about a loving God who would say this: mankind's got a problem. They can't solve themselves. And yes, they have turned their back on me numerous times. However, my plan from the beginning, before the beginning of the foundation of the world, was that I was going to send the sacrifice. But it won't just be any sacrifice. It will be my very Son to die for people who continually turn their back on me. When the Bible says, casting all your anxiety on him because he cares for you, that means he concerns himself with you. I want you to just let that marinate for today. That when you think about God, I want you to understand that he is concerned and he concerns himself with you. Now, I would propose this, that as a military individual, if I'm going to put myself back in the position of the charge of the Light Brigade as we come to a conclusion, if you genuinely believe that the commanding officer cares for you, if you genuinely believe that the commanding officer has sacrificed more for you than he's ever asked you to sacrifice for him, then that might make you a little bit more endeared to him. That's what I propose as the goal. And I want you just to let that kind of sit there today as you reflect on the charge of the Light Brigade. And I want these words to echo in your mind. Yours, just like theirs, yours is not to make reply. Yours is not to reason why. If God said do it, don't spend all the time in the world reasoning through it. He said do it. Yours is but to do and to die. I think it's quite interesting in 1 Peter that it saturates itself with suffering. One of the greatest components of 1 Peter is this: through your suffering for doing what is right, you could actually allow other people to glorify God in the day of visitation. Isn't that what this conference is about? So how about this? Next time you think, woe is me, think about this. What an awesome opportunity. What an awesome opportunity to suffer faithfully for the loving God who cares and concerns himself with me. Thank you so much.
We will begin another session at 9 a.m. with Brother Sam Jones right here. There will be a couple other classes being offered. Again, free refreshments. I'm talking water and chips down in the exhibit area. And at lunchtime, we've got some food trucks coming and some tables and chairs set up in the activity center. Freed Hardeman will probably be putting up some things, getting ready for tonight. So please give them their space. We'll probably be on the far side. And let's all get along and let's have a great time. Thank you so much, Joe. Awesome lesson. You're free to go where you need to go. Thank you.